Hi everybody, thanks for stopping by. This is Peter, Thailand bound. If you haven't been to my channel before, I make videos about Thailand. I first visited Thailand in 1992. I've been going there for 3 decades, almost 3 decades, 27 years if you want to be exact. I spent half of my time in the UK, half of my time in Thailand. I was there several weeks ago. I'll be there again just after the new year. And as I say, I make lots and lots of videos about Thailand. Many of them are requested videos. Before we get into this video, a couple of questions were asked that I need to reply to. First of all, somebody asked me if I had green hair, if I dyed my hair green. No, I can guarantee you, I'm nearly 60, I don't dye my hair, not even to get rid of all this grey stuff up here. No, it's the software I use. I have a green background when I film, and I stick in quite a nice picture like this one behind. And unfortunately, I haven't quite mastered it yet. I'm not really a techie, hence the little bit of green that's left around my hair and sometimes along the shoulder there as well. So I hope that answers that one. The second question is, why do I, when I'm making these videos, I often look up like this. Do I have a script on the ceiling? No, that's not it, guys. I've got CCTV all around the house. The screens are up there. Sometimes I'll see movement. It's distracting. Maybe I should have them over there or that side. But I tend to look up whenever I see movement, like a car coming down the street, something like that. So I hope that's cleared up those 2 points. Now it's time for another video. The video that I'm going to do for you today, it's one of those relationship videos. It involves an English guy and a Thai lady. The Thai lady, without being derogatory, is a little bit past her sell-by date. Her name is Quan, and the guy's name is Derek. Now, before I get into the story, what I need to do is give you some background on Derek, fill you in on the background of Quan, how she happened to be in Bangkok, because she wasn't from Bangkok. And obviously Derek has flown 6,000 miles to get there. So what spurred him on to get there? So that being said, we'll start with Derek and his background and how he came to be in Bangkok and meet Quan. Now, we're talking around the year 1999-2000, so almost 20 years ago. This is from my days in Bangkok when I lived there permanently. I lived there continually for 6 years, and this is one of the stories that I know of, first-hand information. It wasn't told to me, so you know, I pretty much know all the facts. Now, with Derek, he was a man who was quite a timid man. He didn't really have any personality. He wasn't one of those guys who walked into a room and lit it up. He wasn't one of those guys that people were keen to get to know. He wasn't one of those guys that attracted the ladies. He was a pretty ordinary guy. He was honest, hardworking, but he didn't really have a lot going for him. On top of that, he still lived with mother. He lived with his mum, and he didn't have any brothers. He didn't have any sisters. He was very close to his mother. But unfortunately for Derek, he was about 45. He'd never had a relationship with a female, not a serious relationship anyway. And the few relationships he'd started, he'd actually scared off the girls. I'll tell you about that, why he scares girls, a little bit later on in the video. Now, Derek is or was a self-employed gardener, and when I say gardener, he wasn't a professional. He wouldn't come around and landscape your garden. He'd cut your grass, he'd trim the hedges, he'd weed, he'd do things like that. And a lot of the jobs he did were for pensioners, you know, older people who were retired from work. They were getting on, couldn't really do the work themselves. Now, Derek lived or lives in a town called Eastbourne. If you're not British, then you won't know where that is necessarily. Eastbourne is on the south coast. It's famous for being one of those towns that attracts a lot of retirees, a lot of pensioners. And so if you can set the scene, Eastbourne, you've got Derek there. He's a gardener. He goes round, he trims people's hedges. He still lives with mum. He's never had a girlfriend. And before we get into the story, we'll now move over to Quan and her background. Now, Quan, at this time, when she met Derek, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in this video, she was 42. She first came down to Bangkok in, I don't know the year, but she was basically 18 years of age. She's now 42. Not a bad looking girl, Quan, not a stunner, not the most beautiful Thai girl you'll see, but certainly not ugly, and certainly not ugly and quite attractive. Now, when I say Quan came down to Bangkok, she wasn't from Bangkok. She was from Isan, like a lot of them are. She came from a town which is northwest of Khon Kaen. If you're not familiar with Khon Kaen or you've never been to Thailand, Khon Kaen is the official capital of the north, Isan. Isan is a rural farm area. Udon Thani is northwest, as I say, and Quan came from a village which was about 5 miles outside of Udon Thani. Now, Quan's village, it was nothing more than really a dirt road that ran between several wooden shacks, houses, cattle underneath the houses, houses up on stilts, typical Thai style. One or two streets. There was a shop in the town, one of these typical Thai shops that sell Chang beer and local cigarettes, that sort of thing. So that's where Quan was raised. That was her background. Now, like a lot of girls, Quan went down to Bangkok. For some reason, she was talked into it, or she was taken down there, or she was coaxed down there. I don't know. But she ended up in Bangkok. Now, at the time that our story begins, she'd been there for about 22 years. As I say, she went down there when she was about 18. Very good looking girl back then, Quan. Now, when she first went down there, she started off in Pat Pong. If you don't know Pat Pong, which is no reason why you would if you hadn't been to Thailand, Pat Pong is one of 3 main entertainment areas. I've got to be very careful how I explain things. It's YouTube. I can't be too direct, so you'll have to read between the lines. Pat Pong is a red light area. It was one of the first in Bangkok, not the very first. It became popular in the Vietnam War when a lot of the GIs came over on R&R. New Phetchaburi Road was their main area, but they did migrate over to Pat Pong, and it became quite famous in the 70s and 80s for famous shows. And again, I can't be too direct explaining what those shows were, but it was a red light area, so you can put 2 and 2 together. So Quan first came down to Bangkok, went into Pat Pong, into a very, very popular go-go bar. It was one of the, I don't know if it was one of the King's Group's go-go bars. They own several bars in Pat Pong. I don't know if it was a King's Group bar back then, but it was now one of the King's Group bars. Now, she was 18, she was working in a go-go bar, she was very popular, she had a lot of customers. This went on for several years. Now, obviously, she got older over time, and eventually she moved out of a go-go bar, and she was in a beer bar, quite a popular beer bar. This was about 6 or 7 years later. Now, she moved from Pat Pong over to Nanaplaza, and in those days, Nanaplaza wasn't as it is today. It was originally built in the 70s as a normal kind of shopping centre. When I got there in 1992, there were no bars on the ground level. The ground level was parking. There was a restaurant, there was a gold shop, there was a pharmacy. There were about half a dozen to a dozen go-go bars on the second floor. There was a snooker club on the third floor, which later became a disco. And that closed down a little bit after opening, not very successful. So Quan moved over to Nanaplaza. She got a job in one of the very, very busy beer bars. So she was doing similar work to what she was doing in Pat Pong. The only difference was she wasn't putting on a swimsuit and dancing on a stage, but she was still popular. She was still getting lots of guys. Now, something I didn't mention, I should have mentioned at the beginning of the story, Quan actually had 2 or 3 children up in Udon Thani. Her mother was looking after them, or some of her family anyway. She didn't wear bikinis when she was dancing in Pat Pong. It was a one-piece swimsuit. She was still very slim, and obviously when you've had children you can't show all of your body for obvious reasons. Now, she'd had a boyfriend or husband when she was very, very young. Typical of a lot of these girls, he was a heavy drinker, turned violent. She had to get away from him, and that was one of the reasons Quan came down to Bangkok. So the children were still up north, quite important in the story. Now, Quan had worked in the beer bars in Nanaplaza. She'd moved, she'd gone to some other areas. She'd gone to Soicowboy for a while. She was always on the move looking for a bit more money. You know what it's like, the grass is always greener. Now, for a while, she changed jobs. She went from working in a beer bar to a soapy massage. She did that for a while. And to anybody who doesn't know what a soapy massage is, it's like a regular massage. A lot of soap and bubbles involved. It gets quite active, let's say that. And there's quite a happy ending for the guy at the end. So she did that for a while. She wasn't really keen on soapy massages. She tried escorting, but she didn't get too many customers when she was on the escorting books. And she went back to the beer bars. Now, at the time our story starts, Quan was getting quite tired. She was now 42. She'd done the go-go bars, she'd done the beer bars, she'd done the soapy massage. She was working in beer bars that weren't quite as popular. She'd gone down to Pattaya. She worked in beer bars there. But as I say, she was getting tired, and she was 42 now. She was starting to look her age. And when she'd first come down to Bangkok, she was getting bar fined every night, on the weekend, sometimes 3-4 times, sending a lot of money back home to her family. But it was starting to dry up a bit now. And when this story starts with Derek, she wasn't doing very well as far as customers go. Now, we'll swap back over to Derek before we come back to Quan again, because we're nearly ready to start the story. So at this time, back in Eastbourne, Derek was working. He was feeling lonely, very lonely. As I say, he wasn't a guy, he didn't drink heavily, he didn't go out to pubs, he didn't have a lot of friends, not close friends, and he just felt his life was lacking, and it was, quite frankly. He didn't have a girlfriend, and he thought there must be more to life than this. Living with mum and going out cutting people's grass, what have you. There must be a bit more to my life than this. He did a bit of research, and eventually, for whatever reason, he decided he was going to date an Asian woman. He had been to some singles parties in the UK, which were arranged through dating agencies. He didn't get on very well there, guys. I mean, a lot of these women in the UK, they come out of bad relationships, violent relationships. They go to these singles clubs, but they're bitter women. They have chips on their shoulder, and you've got to get over a hurdle just to get away from that bitterness. So he didn't get on very well at those clubs. Somebody had told him, or he'd read on the internet, that Asian girls were a lot easier to get on with. He did his research, and for whatever reason, he decided that he was going to fly out to Bangkok. Now, while he was researching, he'd already got the name of an agency in Sukhumvit Road. I believe it's still there today. It's kind of, if you come out of Sukhumvit Soi 4, turn right past the police box, walk past the pharmacy. I think there is a post office on the right, and then there's a few big office buildings a bit further down, past the landmark. I think it was on the second or third floor, this agency, but big famous agency in Bangkok. And what they were famous for was basically hooking up foreign men with Thai women. Now, back to Quan. As I say, Quan was getting tired. She was lacking customers. She was in a similar mindset as Derek. She thought there must be more to life than this now. She'd done the rounds in Bangkok. She'd worked in every kind of entertainment venue. And at this time, she really fancied a change in her. She wanted a change in her life. Now, she had friends who had married foreigners. She kept in touch. Some had gone to the States, some had gone to Australia, some to the UK, and it seemed to be successful. And as always, the grass always seems greener when you look at somebody else's situation. Quan was advised by a friend, marry a foreigner, life will be easy after that. It isn't always easy after that, but she took this advice and she hooked up with an agency. She went and registered her details. She made a little video. In those days, they took a video of the girl. She described a little bit about herself on video, and guys could go to the agency and they could go through all these videos. They see a nice girl that kind of ticked all the boxes, they could arrange a meeting. Now, she was on the books, so she had high hopes. She was hoping some guy would hook up with her. And as I believe it, Quan did have 1 or 2 dates with some foreign guys that didn't work out. She wasn't keen on them, or they weren't keen on her, or she'd met guys who tried to bed her on the first night, which wasn't what she was looking for. She was trying to basically give the impression that she was a straight girl. She hadn't been in that lifestyle. There was no reason for any guy to believe that she had been. He'd met her in an agency, which was quite nice for Quan because she could hide her background as long as he didn't know any of her friends. And as most of these guys flew over to meet Thai ladies from an agency, generally they didn't. Now, Derek had gone over to Bangkok for 3 weeks. Now, I did mention earlier in the video that he tended to scare women, and I'll tell you the reason for that, and it wasn't his fault really. He had these piercing eyes. He was very, excuse me guys, a bit tired. He had these very, very piercing eyes, and what had happened when he met a girl, he'd just stare into her eyes, really stare, and not in a comfortable way, and these girls felt uncomfortable. Now, he'd had 2 or 3 dates from this agency. He took them out to dinner, He didn't do his research on Thai ladies and Thailand. He was very touchy. He'd sit in the restaurant and try to hold their hand. There'd be a lot of Thai people in that restaurant. The girls would feel embarrassed. If you don't know anything about the Thai culture, I'll just tell you very quickly. They don't do touchy in public. It's all done behind closed doors. And generally Thais, even couples, even married couples, they don't tend to show affection in public. It's just not done there. Derek didn't know this, so he thought he was being, he thought when he took these girls out and he was holding hands, that sort of thing, he thought he was being, quite romantic. But they didn't like it. It was embarrassing. And what with him staring at them with his piercing look, they felt very uncomfortable. And the 3 girls that he dated, who were a bit younger than Quan, I believe they were between 35 and 38, they didn't take to him. They're very polite, the Thais. They won't make somebody lose face. They won't complain. They sat through the dinner date with him uncomfortably because he kept trying to grab their hands and put his arm around their shoulders. They didn't like it, but they sat through it. They just didn't want to meet him again, and they made it clear with the agency. Now, when he met Quan, he did similar, but with Quan, she wasn't getting a lot of hookups with guys. There wasn't a lot of guys choosing her on these videos, so she didn't have a lot of choice. So when she got a phone call from the agency, said, look, we've got a guy here, he's interested in you, nice man from the UK, his name's Derek, he wants to meet up with you. She jumped at the chance. She met Derek, and quite a successful first meeting, although she was kind of taken back by his stare. But she was, she'd seen it all, Quan, basically, because she'd been in Bangkok 22 years. She'd had experience with a lot of foreigners, a lot. And she kind of took it with a pinch of salt. It didn't bother her too much. And the touchy bit, that didn't bother her either, because she was in that business. She was used to foreign men trying to hold her hand when they were out and about. It didn't really bother her. She didn't get embarrassed like the other girls did. So Derek arranged to take Quan out to dinner, which he did. Similar sort of thing. He was, holding a hand, arm around her shoulders. Now, on this very first dinner date, he announced to Quan that he loved her. He'd only met her a few hours ago. They were 15 minutes into the dinner. He had one of her hands clasped in his hands, and he was basically expressing his love for her. He was saying he'd never met a girl like her. He'd fallen head over heels. He loved her deeply, and believe it or not, guys, by the time they were into the dessert course, he was asking her to marry him. Now, Quan was shocked. She didn't know what to think. She didn't know what to say, and she basically told Derek this. She said, look, Derek, you're a nice guy, but it's too quick. I need time to think about this. And that's what she did. She arranged to, she said, call me tomorrow. They went on their separate ways. Call me tomorrow, I'll show you around Bangkok, take you to a couple of temples, do the tour bit, and we can get to know each other and we'll take it from there. Derek, okay, that's fine. He went back to his hotel. Now, Derek was over the moon. He was so excited. He'd fallen in love with this girl. He'd never had a girl that he was so close to. He couldn't wait to meet her again the next day. Now, basically, with Derek, because he didn't have a lot of opportunity, for him, his mind was made up. It was Quan. If she was a willing person, he was going to take her back to the UK. He'd already got this in his mind, guys. I mean, he'd only been out with her one night, and already he was thinking wedding bells. He was thinking about the configuration of his mother's house in Eastbourne. Hadn't even checked with her, but as far as he was concerned, he was, remodeling the home based on that one night out. So that was it. So he did. Derek called Quan the next day, and they met. They had a very nice day. Derek was a little bit, I don't know how to explain it. When you're out with somebody who's constantly touching you and trying to put their arm around you and, staring at you, it must be uncomfortable. But Quan got through the day. They arranged to meet for dinner, and they went their separate ways. Second night now, second date, they arranged to meet, and they did meet. And they had dinner, and again, Derek expressed his love. Now, by this time, Quan had time to think about it when she went back to her room the first night. She thought it over. She thought about her options, and she thought, why not? He's not perfect, but he seems sincere. He seems like an honest guy. He's got his own business in the UK. He told Quan he had his own house. He didn't say it was his mother's house. So she thought, he's got his own house, he's got his own business, he seems like a sincere guy. Yeah, I'll go for it. So without sort of boring you guys with all the nitty gritty details, what happened was he arranged to take Quan back to the UK. So Derek goes back, he tells mother all about Quan, how happy he is. His mother's a little bit suspicious. She's never sort of known Derek to be in love like this before, but she's happy for him, supports him. So Derek arranges everything. His mother agrees to put Quan up in the house. He has a double room anyway, so they, he gets all the necessary. Guys, just hold it there for one moment, will you? The postman's here. It always happens when I make a video. Right, I'm back again. Sorry about that. Okay, where were we? Lost my thought process for a moment there. Right, so Derek's back in the UK. He's told his mother about Quan. They're remodeling his bedroom a little bit to accommodate her. Now, just to save on all the details, we'll get straight to the important part of the story. Quan eventually flies over, joins him. I think Derek went over and came back with Quan, and they came back on a 6 months marriage visa, something like that, which entitled her to come to the UK, and if he married her in the UK, she was entitled to stay here. So Quan came back to the UK with Derek. They moved into Derek's mother's house. You know what the Thai women are like. You know, she became very quickly close to Derek's mother, helped her cleaning, cooking, everything like that. Of course, Derek's mother, who was now getting on in life a little bit, she loved it. She was absolutely delighted that Quan was doing the housework, washing the dishes, doing little errands for her, because a lot of English women, they won't. Some of them are quite lazy, actually. So his mother really liked the company of Quan and basically treated her like a daughter. Derek continued his gardening. He was out and about. Sometimes he was busier than other times. Obviously, in winter, you have snow clearing, you have bits and pieces, but nowhere near as much work as you do in the summer. Now, at this time, this was springtime, so Derek was starting to get busier and busier. He was out a lot of the time. Quan had settled in quite nicely. Now the problem is when you're in an environment of the beer bars, the go-go bars, you're always surrounded by a lot of your friends. It's a very busy, noisy environment. You eat together with all the girls in the bar. You talk to a lot of customers. When you go back to your room, generally a lot of these girls in Bangkok, they'll share 2-3 to a room or an apartment to save cost. Now, to be taken out of that atmosphere, that environment rather, and be living in a house in England with an older woman who a lot of the time she was out, or she'd have a nap upstairs in her room. So Quan was left to her own devices. She went out, she had a look around Eastbourne town centre. She'd walk along the seafront, obviously very, very cold, nothing like Thailand where it was very, very hot. She'd wrap up warm and she'd go and walk along the seafront. But by this time she'd now been in Eastbourne for about 4 months, and she was starting to get a little bit lonely. She missed her friends, not so much her children and her parents, because she didn't see much of them anyway. But as I say, she was with bar girls all the time, so it just wasn't normal for Quan to spend a lot of time by herself, and she was getting lonely. Now, luckily for Quan at this time, she was in the town centre one day, on a Friday afternoon, and she decided she'd go and have a cup of coffee somewhere. Now, when she was in this establishment having her coffee, in walked a couple of Thai girls and ordered a coffee, and they sat down on the table next to her. They started talking to each other. She couldn't believe it. 2 Thai girls in Eastbourne. She couldn't resist. Because they were speaking Thai, she just couldn't resist. She said, "Oh, you're from Thailand," or something along those lines. And you know what the Asians are like. As soon as they know they're from the same country, they all become friends very, very quickly. The 2 girls invited Quan onto their table. They sat there for about an hour and a half drinking coffee. They bought another coffee. They bought Quan a coffee. Got to know her. Where do you come from? What's your history? Now, as it happens, these girls had a similar background. I'm not going to extend the story just for the sake of it and tell you the background of these 2 girls, but let's just say they worked in Bangkok in a similar environment, without the full details. So they all got on like a house on fire, all 3 of them. Now, when they left and parted company, the 2 girls gave their phone numbers to Quan. Quan gave their phone number to them. they made it quite clear that there were 2 or 3 other Thai girls in town, and that Quan should hook up with them. They went out once a week to a local bar. I think the bar was called Chicago's. It was kind of like it wasn't a pub and it wasn't a club. It was kind of like a what they called a fun pub. It was a modern bar with a little bit of nice lighting, bit of a dance floor, and generally the people went there were sort of 30 plus. So anyway, they used to go to this place Chicago's every Thursday night. It was a ladies' night, I think it was, half price drinks. So they invited her to Chicago's on the first Thursday, the Thursday after they'd met her. She asked Derek if he wanted to come along. She didn't really want him to come along because it was a girls' night out, it was ladies' night, but she was polite and she asked him. Luckily for her, Derek said no. There was something on the TV that he liked, a gardening programme. Alan Titchmarsh, he's famous in the UK if you're not from England. He was on a Thursday night, he wanted to watch that. So Pla went out, she ordered a taxi, she went to Chicago, she met the other 2 girls. When she met these 2 girls, there were another 2 or 3 Thai girls, which was quite surprising. So there were about half a dozen girls there. They had a nice night. Quan came home, she felt a hell of a lot better. Now, bearing in mind, guys, she'd been in Eastbourne on her own, other than Derek's mother and Derek. She had no company, she had no friends. She'd come out of this very vibrant lifestyle in Bangkok. She was getting very, very lonely. She suddenly met these half a dozen Thai women. They'd all exchanged numbers. They'd had a drink together. She was very, very happy at this point. And needless to say, she hooked up with 1, 2, 3, or all of them, very, very regular. She'd meet them in town. She'd go for coffee, either one, or her and a couple of them. Now, as it transpired, one of the girls who met Quan one Saturday afternoon, Derek was working. He was doing one of his gardening jobs, cutting a hedge or something. Quan met one of these girls in town, and this girl mentioned that her and a friend worked in a Thai restaurant. It wasn't, when I say the word restaurant, you visualize, like, 24 tables, tablecloths, and a brass sign out the front with nice brass lights. It wasn't like that. It was more of a kind of a cafe. But it wasn't a cafe. It was a restaurant, but it kind of looked like a cafe. It was a, let's just say, low budget. They hadn't put a lot of money into it, but it was popular, mainly with guys who'd been out to Thailand or somewhere else in Asia. So this girl, if I believe her name was Nok, she invited Quan and said, look, I work in this Thai restaurant. I know they could do with somebody at least part-time. Why don't you come along and speak to the boss? The boss was a Thai lady who was married to an English guy. Quite a bit older than the rest of them. I think she was 55 at this stage, but it was a Thai business. The husband had set it up for his wife, and it was all Thais working there. Now, of course, Quan was thrilled to bits. She hated sitting at home having nothing to do. She went along and spoke to the lady who owned the restaurant. Lady had a little chat with her, asked her what she did. She wasn't too bothered with Quan's background, it didn't matter. Asked her if she'd like to work evenings, a few hours a night, maybe 3, 4 to start with, see how they got on. And that's what she did. She went in, she was doing a bit of waitressing and, serving drinks, food, that sort of thing. Now, not immediately, but several days into her job, she found out that there was a 3-bedroom apartment above the restaurant. And for some reason, these girls kept disappearing. The waitresses, that is. And she found it very strange that on some days they'd have 6 waitresses in there, and they never had more than 2 or 3 customers in the restaurant. Quite strange. Why would the boss need 6 girls in there, and why would they keep disappearing to this apartment? Now, I think you know where this is going. The 3-bedroom apartment was actually being used to, as I say, it's YouTube, so we'll have to be careful what we say here. The 3-bedroom apartment was actually being used as another business, separately from the restaurant. And let's just say the only men that went to this business, this apartment, the only clients that went to this apartment were men. There were no women, it was always men. It was always men on their own, and they always disappeared up the stairs with one of the girls, if not 2 of the girls. Now, a little bit later on, Quan was obviously very intrigued, and she found out that it was being used as a brothel. The girls were making money. The real money came from this brothel. Guys were coming, they were choosing, they had regular customers, they were going upstairs for half an hour, 45 minutes, they were getting paid £50 a time. £50, guys, if you're not English, at that time was about 60 US dollars for about an hour, half an hour to an hour. Now, obviously, there isn't a lot of these kind of places in the UK, maybe in London, but not so much in the smaller rural towns, seaside towns. I think this place was the only brothel in Eastbourne. Asian girls, very, very nice. Now, another thing that surprised Pla, sorry, not Pla, I've moved over to one of the other girls, getting a bit carried away with the story, Quan, was, one thing that surprised Quan was that she was, now if you cast your mind back to the beginning of the story, she wasn't getting too many customers in Bangkok because of her age. She was 42, she was looking a bit older, worse for wear, and she kind of accepted that fact. This is why she'd gone to the agency in the first place. Now, something that surprised her in the UK, she got a lot of looks from guys, and this took her back a little bit because it kind of made her feel like she was 25 again. Now, obviously, the reason for this, Quan didn't know the reason for this, but there is the reason for it, which if you grew up in the UK, you'll know. There isn't a lot of opportunity for guys, especially once you get over the age of kind of 30, 40. You know, if you're looking for a relationship, it's very, very difficult. The girls, the English girls, tend to be, I don't want to say the wrong thing here, they tend to be choosy, shall we say, we'll keep it polite. They tend to be quite choosy, and if you don't have a lot of money, or you're not really handsome, and you kind of past your sell-by date, then you're not really going to get a look in. So, of course, when Pla, even though she's 42, she's walking down the street, she's in a shop, you know, guys are trying to speak to her, they're smiling at her, they're winking at her, and she loves it. She hasn't had this for years. So, you know, it was quite a surprise, but it was a pleasant surprise. Guys were looking at her, they wanted to meet her, they were smiling at her. Now, because of this, when she found out about the apartment above the restaurant, she was invited to join in the activities, let's say that. And of course, with her background, she was only too keen to make money. Now, the only barrier as far as Quan could see was her age, and she thought originally that she wouldn't attract too many customers. But as I've just explained to you, there was no problem there. There were plenty of guys who were willing to pay good money to spend time with Quan, and they did. Now, unfortunately for Derek, he didn't know anything that was going on. Quan was spending more and more time at the restaurant slash apartment in brackets, and she was making good money. Now, Derek knew nothing of this. As far as Derek knew, she was working longer hours because she wanted to make a little bit more money to send home to her family. Derek was quite okay about that because he had a limited income. He couldn't provide her with the kind of money that she needed to send back. He looked after her, give her a little bit of housekeeping money, a little bit of a budget, but he couldn't give her any serious money, if that makes sense. So he was quite happy that Quan could go out in the evening, and he kind of missed her in the evenings. When he came home from work, he wanted her to be there, but you know, a lot of the time she'd have dinner with him, early dinner, 5:30, and then she said, look, I've got to go to work. She'd go out. But it was very puzzling to Derek eventually because, you know, she started to come in later and later. Originally it had been 10:30, 11, then it was half 11, then it was 12. And there were a few nights at the weekend where she didn't get back till 3 o'clock in the morning. Her excuses were the restaurant was packed, they had to stay behind. Because there was limited staff, they had to clean the restaurant up for the following lunchtime service on the Sunday. Which he did believe, he tended to believe. There was no reason for him not to. Now, by this time, Pla had kind of worked her way into the local population very well. She was very popular with the guys. She had her own customers, regular customers who'd come and see her. There was one guy in particular who seen her very, very often. His name was Philip. And Philip's name is quite important in this story. It will come up more and more. But for now, we'll keep it that Philip was just a regular customer. He visited Pla once or twice. I keep saying Pla. He visited Quan once or twice a week, and they became good friends. That's all I'm going to say for now about Philip. Now, by this time, Derek was starting to get suspicious. Quan seemed to have a lot more money than she should be earning. And by this time, we're about a year into the story now, maybe a little bit more. Something that I need to mention that's quite important. Quan, in between all this, had a baby daughter with Derek. normal baby daughter. She was very, very young. She'd had her daughter. She'd originally, don't forget, she was there 4 or 5 months before she started working in the restaurant. She'd had the baby. She was doing some legitimate work in the restaurant. Now, Derek and Derek's mother tended to look after the daughter most of the time while Quan was working in the restaurant. Now, Derek didn't have a lot of friends, as we said, but one of his customers, his regular customers, he used to go around and cut his grass in the summer. I think it was once every 2 weeks. A guy called Ian. Ian was kind of a friend, not a close friend, but he was. Now, Ian had mentioned to Derek in a roundabout way, because he'd heard about Quan, what she was up to, as did a lot of other people, because Eastbourne's a small town. When there's a brothel, everybody knows about it, and you can't hide what you're doing. Unfortunately, the last person to find out about this was Derek. He didn't know anything, and he found out from Ian. Ian told him in a roundabout way. He wasn't direct. He didn't say your wife is, going with male customers for money. What he said was something like, as a friend, I'll advise you when your wife Quan goes out to work. If I was you, I would just go there one night and see what she's doing. And to cut a long story short, Derek found out what she was doing, and he was devastated. Rather than angry, he was devastated, heartbroken. He'd found the love of his life. Quan, he brought her back to the UK. They'd had a baby daughter, and only for her to become a working girl. We'll have to say it that way. Absolutely devastated. Now, his mother found out about it. She didn't want Quan in the house, and again, to cut a long story short, Quan was kind of embarrassed. She felt a bit sorry for Derek. She didn't see the point in trying to continue the marriage. Obviously, Derek knew full well what she was doing. She just couldn't see it working. She went back to the house when Derek wasn't there in the day, packed a bag. She was very, very embarrassed in front of Derek's mother, made her excuses, but she packed a bag and she moved into the restaurant, into the apartment. One of the rooms, she stayed there on her own after the last customer had gone, and then it was used as a working room when the restaurant was open, when they were using the apartment. So a little while after that, they were now separated. Derek and Quan were separated. Quan was living in the restaurant, and Philip was still coming. Remember, we mentioned Philip. Philip was a regular customer of Quan's. He'd been coming to see her for quite a while. Now, Philip was quite a switched on guy. He had his own, he had a small garage. He used to repair vehicles. Had a guy, an apprentice working for him, a young guy. He was making good money. Only a small garage, but as I say, it was Philip's garage. Now, Philip had been married. He had children from a previous marriage. His wife had, they'd separated. She'd moved out. She took the children with her. I don't know what happened to her. Anyway, Philip really liked Quan. He wasn't really bothered that what she'd been doing in the past, but he didn't like the thought. He'd gone and he was visiting her more and more and more. And when he originally started going there, he was only going for his self-satisfaction. He wasn't bothered what she was doing when he wasn't there. But as he became closer and closer to Quan, he got to the point where he thought, oh, I don't like this. When I'm not there, she's doing things with other guys and I don't like it. So he asked Quan if she would meet him for lunch one day. Quan agreed. And he kind of said to her, he said, look, Quan, you like me, I think. I like you. I've got my own business. I've got my own house. I can give you a much bigger budget than Derek gave you, because she'd already mentioned what the situation was with Derek. He said, I'd like you to finish at the restaurant, move in with me. I've got my own house. It's just about paid for. I've got a nice car on finance. I've got my garage. You can carry on seeing your friends, but I don't want you working there. If you hook up with me, if you move in with me, I don't want you working in that restaurant. Quan was always looking for new opportunities. You know what the girls are like from Bangkok, the bar girls, they never miss a trick. So she thought, yeah, why not? Why not give it a go? I'll move in with Philip. And she did. Now, I don't know what happened after that. So as far as we're concerned for this story, that's the end as far as it goes for Quan. The only other thing I can tell you is she wasn't really particularly interested in taking the daughter she'd had with Derek. She wasn't really interested. It's really strange because women in the UK, you know, when they separate from men, divorce from men, if they've got children, they fight tooth and nail to get custody of those children. You know, they just don't want to lose their children. It's a little bit different with some Thai bar girls. You know, I can't give you a reason why. I'll just say when she moved in with Philip, she wasn't bothered about seeing her daughter, well, living with a daughter. Maybe she went to visit her, I don't know. So that was it. You know, Quan, at this stage, she was knocking on 44's door. She'd had a baby girl, with a beautiful baby girl actually, with Derek. And she moved in with Philip. I don't know if the relationship lasted. If I had to guess, I'd say no. Because what normally happens with these ex-bar girls, when they're onto a good thing, one of several things happens. Either they, once they've moved in, they clean the guy out of his money. You know, they get access to his bank accounts. They start slowly siphoning off his money. They get greedy. The guy finds out. He ends a relationship. That's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is they get bored of the guy they're living with. They take a lover. They have an affair. The man she's living with finds out, chucks her out. She'll move in with her new lover. That'll last for a while, and then she'll move on to the next one. So generally it doesn't last. So from this point on, guys, for this story, I'll just say that's the end as far as Quan and Philip and Derek are involved. So the only other bit to add to the story is what happened with Derek and his baby daughter. Now, Derek deeply loved his daughter. Like any father, why wouldn't you? You know, it's your own flesh and blood. He felt a little bit sad when he looked at his daughter's eye. I can't remember the name of the daughter. I was told, I can't remember now. But anyway, he felt sad. Sometimes he'd look at his daughter, who was spitting image of Quan, and when he looked at his daughter, he could see Quan in her face, and it made him feel sad. He had, you know, although what had happened with Quan was very unfortunate, he had some good memories. He'd spent, you know, a long time with her. She'd lived with him in it, and especially in the early days, you know, he got hot butter on his toast every night, which he wasn't used to. Like I say, it's YouTube, so I've got to talk in a roundabout way, but I'm sure you know what I meant. So once again, he's on his own, but there is a happy ending to the story, guys, and it's this. Derek was living with his mother. He was lonely. He had nothing in his life. He was working. He had his room in his mother's house, and that was all he had in his life. Not much of an existence. Now, Derek was very lucky because Quan wasn't interested in getting custody of the daughter. If she had been, Derek would have lost her, because I don't know about other countries, but in the UK, when a mother and a father contest a child, 99.9% of times it's a mother who gets custody. Now, in this particular case, obviously Quan wasn't interested. Derek went to the courts to get custody of his daughter. It wasn't challenged by Quan, which was unusual. So he went in front of the judge to get custody. The judge said the judge seen there was nobody contesting this. Derek got full custody of his daughter, which meant even if Quan changed her mind at a later date and she wanted to take her daughter, she couldn't do it. She could have access rights, but she'd have to apply to the courts, and Derek was the parent, the 100% full-time carer, parent, call it what you will. So Derek got something out of this. As I say, his life was pretty mundane before, living with his mum. He didn't have anything in his life. He now had a beautiful daughter, young girl. He loved her thoroughly. As I say, he could see Quan in her, which was a little bit sad when he thought back on the memories. But he had his daughter. He spent a lot of time. He showered her with gifts. Birthdays were a lot of fun. Christmas was a lot of fun. I believe today she's around 21, 22. She's quite successful. As I understand it, I did hear this. This is third party information, so I'm not sure. I did hear that she was going on to become a solicitor. So, you know, obviously his daughter grew up with Derek, and he had a lot of fun bringing her up. So quite a happy ending for Derek. I don't know what happened to Quan, but as I say, probably, as it always happens, it probably went sour, and she probably ended up going back on a plane to Bangkok. But that's it, guys. That's the end of this relationship story. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, let me know. I've got a few more stories tucked up my sleeves, and I'll tell you a few more. But for now, this time, that's it. This is Pete signing out, Thailand bound. I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks for watching.